So we're here today to talk about vocational competency and industry currency. My understanding is that this is not a difficult standard, but it is one that tends to be very misunderstood. So hopefully this morning we can clarify a few of the issues, and up front I'll make the statement that the majority of providers, the majority of individual trainers, make this standard a lot harder than it needs to be. I will probably have a rant about policies and processes that your organisations use to support the demonstration of vocational competency and industry currency. Because what we see quite often is that your process and what your organisation has said it will do in regard to establishing vocational competency and industry currency is what's getting you into trouble, because they have enormous big matrices that are very difficult to follow. It takes us quite some time to follow them, and your average lecturer will get overwhelmed with what actually has to go into them. So the overarching message is to keep it simple. Oh, chivalry is not dead. Ladies, take a seat. Okay, what we'll cover in this morning's session is an overview on the compliance requirements for trainers and assessors. Obviously, there's been a few changes that have come in this year and a further change that will come in next year, but there's a bit of a twist with that one in regard to the diploma for delivery of the TAE training package, which we'll get to in a minute, an overview of compliance requirements for industry engagement, and a focus on making the connection between demonstrating compliance and that actual industry engagement function. I'm quite astounded the amount of times that people look at the standards individually rather than going, okay, what do I do that makes my training up-to-date, current, and me up-to-date and current as a VET professional? And they'll deal with that part of the standards, and then they'll go, oh, now there's these industry engagement standards, I'd better deal with them as well. And they treat them completely separately. Make it efficient. When you're dealing with your industry engagement standards, make sure that you're recording that, you're taking that knowledge and experience, and you're applying it to your compliance requirements in regard to how you're demonstrating against these standards. So we're going to be trying to make that connection a bit there for you. These are the standards. You've all read them before, and there's really very little difference, although we thought we'd make the standards longer and easier and simple in 2015, so we thought that we'd have 3 standards that address this rather than the one. So the first is vocational competency and industry currency. In the green, you won't find that in the standard, but we thought it was handy to put in because really it's what you interpret as it meaning. So vocational competency, at least to the level being delivered and assessed. This is your industry qualification or equivalent. I have had many intense conversations with people saying they took equivalence out of these standards. And I'll go, no, it wasn't in the last ones either. It's never been in there, it was in the user's guide. You can still demonstrate your industry qualification by demonstrating equivalence, and I'll go through what's required for that in a few minutes. Current industry skills directly relevant for the training and assessment being provided. The skills that reflect you're actually aware of what current industry practices are. Went out to a training provider many years ago, it wasn't that many years ago, they were doing window fitting. The first thing that they taught was how to putty in windows. Really, really rarely, only really in Federation buildings now do you use that skill, but that was the basis for their curriculum. Because our system works on training packages being what industry currently reflects as the requirement for their industry, and industry professionals such as yourselves that are current in what's happening out there. That's what we're requiring from 1.13b. Then there's your current knowledge and skills in VET. Had someone that just this morning say, but I'm a trainer and assessor. You didn't exactly say it like that, did you, Grant? No. But I'm a trainer and assessor. Why is that not my demonstration that I've got current knowledge and skills in vocational training and learning? And my question was, it's not that you're not applying those things from undertaking training and assessment, but just undertaking the training and assessment doesn't mean that you're relevant and up to date with what is happening in that side of your vocational currency and competency. What changes have actually happened in VET? What changes have happened in the interpretation of the requirements around VET? And that's what we're looking at from C, staying up to date with your VET theory and practice. We'll move on, clause 1.14. Training and assessment delivered only by people who, so from January this year, there should be no one out there that delivering training and assessment that doesn't have the Cert 4 in training and assessment. That's the TAE 10 qualification, or a diploma or higher level qualification in adult education. And for the assessment only, you have to have the TAE assessor's skill set.
So if somebody holds a diploma or higher level qualification,
yes,
in adult education,
yes,
do they need the certificate for in training and assessment?
No.
Well,
it's an or. There's an or in the middle, but you do have to demonstrate how it has an adult education focus.
Well, we've been, our experience with the TAC auditor was that according to 113C,
yep, the
only way we could meet 113C was to hold the certificate for in training and assessment.
We'll talk about that after the session then, get some clarity around that for you. As I said, the TA, the Cert 4 for trainers and assessors, there are additional requirements. I'm not sure if they're on the next slide. Nope. In regard to delivery of the TAE qualification itself, you'd all be aware by now that the TAE, she's coming towards me. Is this because there's a question or no? You're all aware that the new TAE 16 qualification or training package has been released. I haven't got it here, but in the standards that deal specifically with TAE from the RTO standards, it does say that from the 1st of January 2017, everyone who delivers from the training and assessment training package has to have the diploma qualification or higher. That's true on one level. However, we've now had a training package come out, and some of the units within that training package can't be delivered by anyone other than already has the diploma qualification. I know that there's not a lot of people that have gone to have the 16 on their scope yet, but just be aware if you are delivering in that industry area and you do want to have the particular units that are relevant to the diploma, you have to have that qualification now, not on 1st of January 2017, because it's a specific requirement within the training package. How do I demonstrate that I've got the qualification when no one in the state has the qualification because no one's got it on their scope yet? We would expect that people in the initial stages used the deeming approach, which is to get someone to deem, or usually a panel of people who can justify that it is chicken and egg, justify that they have the units and the qualifications that make up the new qualification. And then there's a deeming process that occurs where they deem that someone has demonstrated that they have the level of skills equivalent to the qualification that's actually being delivered. And it's the only way that we can work. We don't magically say, we'll register these two providers and they get the whole market for TAE. It doesn't work that way. Usually we'll use a panel approach or the deeming approach to achieve the equivalency. Who can deem?
Yeah, sorry.
With deeming, you have to have the ability to demonstrate to us the process that you've used to determine that the person doing the deeming actually holds the competencies outlined in the qualification.
So it comes back to the same issue.
Well, really what we want to see the process that you've used. It's almost like two deeming processes concurrently. You've got to deem the person that you're putting forward to do the deeming actually has the appropriate level of experience to make a judgment that you would have the level of skill required in those units. And that will be, your organisation does, and your CEO takes overarching responsibility for that. As long as you can demonstrate your process and then articulate how. So it's the person doing the deeming and whoever's taking responsibility, usually your RTO CEO or an academic director possibly, that will make that decision. And they'll have a process of how they've justified how that decision's been made. Professional development. Trainers and assessors undertake professional development in the knowledge and practice of VET. including competency-based training and assessment. That one is something that can be done through formal and informal activities, as a lot of the others can, through your courses, your workshops, your seminars, your mentoring. It's how you're keeping current in the knowledge and practice of VET learning and assessment. These are the requirements. I'll run through these quickly because they are outlined in the standards for you. Individuals working under supervision. Everyone has to have at least the vocational competencies to the level being delivered. Again, it doesn't say there that you can't use equivalence to demonstrate that. You've also got to have current industry skills and one of the skill sets outlined there. In some cases, trainers and assessors don't hold the qualification. We'll go through the equivalency. This kind of fits in with what I haven't covered in this presentation, which we probably should add in there, is more of the process around deeming and who's making those decisions initially before you can actually deem people. Evidence to demonstrate demonstrate equivalence. It can include your relevant past training, including your superseded and pre-existing industry qualifications, as long as they're current. Your experience and professional development that you've undertaken, only to the level required. We quite often get people that, we're all proud of our qualifications, we're proud of what we've done, but remember, for this process, you're only required to demonstrate it to the level that articulates to the individual units of competency that you're going to be delivering in. Some people over-egg the pudding, and again, I come back to some people's policy and process within their RTO and organisation requires them to. Grant.
In certain training packages or certain industries,
Yes.
higher qualifications are required.
Yes, they are.
In that aspect, not just as necessarily on the training and thing, but in the training and assessing competencies from other training packages.
Yes.
The determination on that needs to be carefully, because sometimes it's starting to become way out of the league of what's involved or what's required.
It's mapped to the individual units. When we look at vocational currency and competency, we map it to the individual units. So if the training package stipulates that you have to have a higher level qualification to deliver certain units, we expect you to articulate how you've actually can demonstrate that you have that competency. So when it says level required, that will be dictated by either the level of the unit being delivered or the specific requirements for assessors that are outlined in the training package. So make sure you watch for that. Objective of the mapping. As it says there, it's a clear and verified relationship between trainers and assessors' formal or informal training and experience, and qualifications or units that they deliver and assess that identifies and addresses any gaps. So what we want you to do is say, okay, this is what the unit says. It's this simple. This is how I know that I'm relevant and I have the skills to deliver this particular unit. If you get stuck with matrices that don't quite make sense, with a RTO policy that you're going, I really don't understand what that policy is asking me for, how much level of detail do I have to go here, who's making this judgment, take it back to that simple question. How do I know that I know how to do what I do every day? If you take it back to that as your starting point, you're probably 50% of the way there of demonstrating your currency and competency requirements. You're right?
On this one, so what depth of level from an auditing perspective do we need to go to? Previously, it's been to an element level explanation, expression of how I know I meet that performance. But recently, we've been advised it's to the performance criteria.
It is to the performance criteria level. Yes, usually the essential knowledge and skills can be captured fairly holistically within your demonstrating it, because usually those knowledge and skills will apply across a range of the units. One thing I ask you to do is make sure that you're clustering wherever possible when you're addressing this standard. From a currency and competency perspective, there's very few training packages and very few units that don't actually allow you to cluster them when demonstrating this, because a lot of them, there'll be 3 units that collectively articulate a job task. So you can actually, as long as you map it clearly, you can actually articulate that by clustering, and it's something that we highly recommend. Otherwise, we get matrices that have just got cut and paste into every one, the same thing. It's just repetition, it's not required. Relevancy is a common issue. You have to clearly establish the relationship between your training experience and the unit or qualification. The one that I probably get and have answered the most is, I have a master's degree in business administration. Why don't you just accept that? And I don't actually have to tell you anything more, because obviously my master's in business administration is a lot higher qualification, and if I can get that, I can certainly deliver a Cert 2 or a Cert 3. You then ask the person, when was the last time you actually formulated a profit and loss statement? And they go, it's been a while. Is it a skill that they've had to demonstrate in the past? Probably. Is it a skill that they've done in the last couple of weeks and are regularly doing it as you would expect someone who's delivering it in a training situation? Probably not. So you just have to compare the relevancy of that higher level qualification. We're not saying that qualification is worthless, we're just saying you actually need to demonstrate at the unit level, the performance criteria level, how you're actually current in what happens in that space at the moment. I'll give you an example, and it was when we did the strategic industry audit into aged care. Had a nursing practitioner, extremely highly qualified medical professional, is a nursing practitioner. Why, if I'm a nursing practitioner, can I not meet the requirements for the Cert 3 level qualification? Ask the question, when was the last time you manually handled a patient? Nurse practitioners are predominantly involved in the management of nursing units and making really high level decisions in regard to medical care. They haven't actually manually handled a patient for many, many years. Therefore, the relevancy of that skill and their current knowledge on the technology and the correct lifting techniques for that particular skill, they probably haven't used for many years.
Can they say, especially in nursing or aged care, that when they're doing a demonstration to students, they would actually be continuing to do that task?
Absolutely, if they've actually done that.
Yep.
And that's the level you need to get to, because if you look at the requirements for a nurse practitioner qualification, it doesn't have manual handling of patients within that qualification. You need to bridge the gap. This is what this is about. It's bridging the gap between the higher level qualification and the task that you'll actually be training in.
So what sort of evidence do you need to have to back up? Sorry, what sort of evidence do you need to actually retain with that matrix?
Okay, well, if we move on, it's keeping up to date with current industry skills and knowledge and practice. Hang on, I think it's a slide here somewhere. Okay, things that we would expect you to have is a clear explanation of how the skills have been obtained. If there was any other maybe formal learning that you undertook training in that particular area. You look at former job roles. Obviously you have to have someone, or your organisation will have a process where they verify that you did undertake that skills in a former job role. It may be training courses that you've done since.
So when you say former job roles, what about
Yes.
current job roles? So say things like teamwork or working collaboratively.
Yes.
Is that evidence that you can then apply that to what you're teaching?
Yes, it can be. Yep. So it's actually, certainly, if they're actually skills that you use and you're able to demonstrate that you're using them within a similar environment as you would within the training environment, you can use those skills. Again, it comes back to what I was saying before, and we have deviated a little bit from equivalence, but make sure you use what you're going out there and getting from industry with your industry engagement as well. Make sure that's coming back, and it's another mechanism that you can use. Went out to a forklift RTO the other day, predominantly does forklift delivery. What they do is they actually go into different companies and say, hi, we're doing a lot of training with you guys, can I come in for a couple of days? and use the equipment. Also had, I think, one of the air conditioning electrical qualifications. They went, oh, I just haven't got the staff, I can't have people going, the old return to industry, we just can't afford to do that anymore. So what they had is a major supplier came in and said, there was some change recently in the gassing of air conditioners, and they came in and they gave them a unit. They stripped down the unit, they installed the unit, they put it back to, they stripped it down, they put it back together, they installed it, they uninstalled it. Does that demonstrate the type of equipment, the technology that's being used, how it's installed, how it's not installed? They actually had someone from the organisation that supplies the equipment come out to them. They then documented that that session had occurred. Some people would even go to the extent of either getting someone else that attended it to sign off that yes, this definitely happened from a verification perspective, or the company that supplied the equipment signed off. There's lots and lots of different ways, but don't forget to incorporate when you're doing your industry engagement, that is a critical way that you're keeping up to date and current with your vocational competencies. Make sure that you actually think of it in that way, and that when you come back to your workplace, you're documenting what you've done, because it's a great way to kill two birds with one stone. Completely lost where I am now. We'll go to the factors that influence industry, equivalency. We'll go back there. So you have to have a mapping that's clear and verified the relations between the two. You then have to have a process of demonstrating how the person doing the deeming is actually qualified to make that judgment, and then you have to put the two together. And we want to see the process that you've actually used to make sure that that's what's occurred. I'll go into in a minute, I'll go into a section that looks at what we're specifically looking at from a regulatory perspective. I think we've been through this. Industry currency enables trainers to deliver and assess VET relevant to industry and is central to the concept of being a dual professional. You guys have got a really tough gig. Anyone here that does vet in schools? I would say you've got even a tougher gig. You're required to stay current and competent in 3 specific occupations. Really, really hard task, and most people do it very, very well. RTOs training and assessment practice are relevant to the needs of industry and informed by industry engagement, and the RTO implements a range of strategies for industry engagement and systematic use. I can't speak, but I can read. Uses the outcome of that industry engagement to ensure the industry relevance of its training and assessment practices and resources, and the current industry skills of its trainers and assessors. If you're going out and doing this, there is a 99.9% chance that you are building your vocational currency and competency. Make sure you use that, make sure you document that engagement that you're having with industry, because it's the way that you're keeping touch with what's actually happening on the ground for your industry. Factors that may influence industry currency, technology and innovation. I'll just say before this, a lot of people, particularly with the currency, they still have the question, how many years experience? How long since I left the industry? Give me the number so that I know that I can only, usually it'll be an RTO and they go, can you give me the number of years that you call current, because then I'll make sure I employ people that have got that, that are that close to the industry that it's 2 years, isn't it? And you'll go, no, you've missed the concept. It's not a time-based continuum when we're looking at currency. It may be that someone hasn't been hands-on on the tools for 10 years, but they have gone out and talked to employers. They've possibly spent some time in the workplace, even if it's been for short durations. They've kept up to date with industry workshops, or they've upskilled their skills. Those things are what keeps you current, and what the auditor wants to see when they go out there is, how have you actually done that? You won't get an auditor to come and tell you, I know the industry currency in your industry area is 2 years, and I know that something changed last week. Take in mind that our auditors do a lot of audits. So they probably have done an audit in your industry area recently. So if you try and send them up the river, they're probably going to know that you're not quite on the money. But what they're interested in is how you've determined that your trainers and assessors are current. What process do you have that says, if we've taken them through these things, if we've engaged with the industry sector, if we've gained with the technology that's being used, if we've talked to our peers, if we've kept up to date with what's in the training packages, because we've used that process, we're fairly sure that our people are current with what's happening out there. As I said, factors that influence are technological innovation. You'll get someone that will go, you do the same thing in my industry that you've done for the last 20 years. We haven't actually had a huge amount of technological innovation in our industry. No dramas, we want to know what work have you done that you can actually make that statement. From the research that you've undertaken, you've determined that there haven't been any significant changes. That's what we want to know, and that's what I'm talking about when I say the process that you've gone through. You've talked to your peers, you've talked to industry, you've confirmed that nothing's actually changed, therefore I'm still current in the industry area. There's obviously the question of practice there, and you would want to demonstrate that you've currently practiced the skill at some stage or through one of the mechanisms, but it can be just as valid if you say, I'm still current because there have been no changes, and here's the evidence and the process I've used to determine that there have been no changes. Changing legislation and regulatory requirements. Anyone doing occupational safety and health training will know that that changes quite often. You'd want to know how your organisation and your trainers and assessors are keeping up with those changes. Your changes to industry practice really does these days, we find, linking with technology a lot, but not necessarily. I know one that's a doozy for WA is the requirement in the bricklaying qualification to build arches. It's more likely nowadays an old house is getting the arches taken out rather than new ones put in. But it's a sign where there's a change to industry practice and that skill may not be used anymore, or it may only be used in a particular part of the country. If it's a requirement in the training package, you still have to demonstrate that you're current with it. It's frustrating because it's not what you do every day, but you still have to. We're talking about nationally portable qualifications. You still have to be putting students out into the marketplace that have all of the skills required from the training package. Therefore, you have to be current in teaching whatever is in there. New and emerging skills and specialisations as work practices change. As I said, there was a change to how air conditioners are gassed. You need to keep up with those changes, otherwise you're going out there and sending students out that have got dated skills already. And technical skill degradation through periods of non-use. We did a high-risk work licence audit, all the qualifications that lead to high-risk work licences. What we found was that a lot of the assessors, whilst they had kept current in their industry, they knew what happened, they knew what was going on. It was a very long time since they've actually done it. And that raised some questions for employees of what was their ability to actually teach it if they hadn't physically done the skill. Doesn't mean you've got to go out there and show that you've done it for 6 months. It's just that there is some connection that you've had with a workplace where you've actually been able to hands-on undertake that skill, and obviously you document it. No one currency period, I've already covered off on this. Specific activity or group of activities represent the best way to maintain industry currency. It will be very specific to the industry area that you deliver in the majority of cases. There's a range of activities that may work for an individual trainer or assessor, and within the context of the quals being provided, and negotiation up front is the key. What we mean by that is anyone who's in an employing situation, it's really good to negotiate this stuff up front with the person that you're going to be employing. Quite often we find that the lecturers are put in a situation where the standards require that they maintain their industry currency, but the employer isn't aware or doesn't understand the nature in how that might have to be done. We see a lot. What have I got? 10 minutes. We might throw out questions in a minute then, but a lot of lecturers go, I would love to do some of these things, but we're in such tight timeframes at the moment that I'm not being released to be able to do it, or there isn't the acknowledgement of the hierarchy within the RTO I work in that I need to go and do these things. Big tip is to negotiate up front what you think will be required, and seek agreement with the employer or the RTO of how you're actually going to roll these things out. So there's an equal understanding between your RTO owners and directors and you as an employer if you're actually in that lecturing space. Particularly, a lot of people put their hands up for VET in schools. Make sure that you actually have someone with the vocational currency. A lot of times, unfortunately, schools are put in the situation where it may be a cheap option to do this course. We can get a lot of students through. There's a smaller cost involved, but unless you can actually up front have someone that can deliver and has that vocational currency, it's very, very difficult to start delivering it and then try and build the skills yourself, which unfortunately is the situation we've had people placed in recent years. Evidence and attendance of PD events. This really goes to your industry currency, just so that I don't confuse the two issues too much. Another way that you can actually demonstrate, you asked before, to what level do you have to demonstrate, or what can you use to demonstrate your industry currency? With your industry engagement, you might go to a PD session or you might go out to an employer and you learn critical skills related to, or that bring you up to date with what's happening in your industry. You can demonstrate your industry currency by going back and saying, these are the things I learnt when I was out there, or the things I realised have changed, and as a result of that PD, we came back and we changed this aspect of our training. You can actually use that as both your evidence for your industry currency as well as your evidence for your industry engagement. This is why I'm saying kill two birds with one stone if you can, because they're both very interrelated subjects. You can't really have one without the other. It's critical to demonstrate clearly how you're using and applying what you've done, and this is back to the question I think one of the ladies here asked as to how you documenting it is fine, and then citing the experience that you had that brought you up to date, whether it was a work-based program or whether it was something where you actually went out and did some PD. Document it, show how you've used it within your organisation as a way of demonstrating compliance. Good practice to undertake following a PD event is to review the information presented and the activities undertaken on the day, and review professional currency and competency register or matrix, whatever you're using, and say, well, what's the direct relationship with that PD that I've just undertaken and the requirements in the training package at the unit level. Adapted your learning and assessment strategies, delivery plans or similar to ensure your students are learning, practicing and demonstrating competency in the skills and practices industry currently uses and requires. If you can demonstrate that, you should have it in your industry engagement pile when the auditor comes out, and you should also have it in your currency pile.
When you do validation moderation and
Yes.
you've got a group of industry people that are delivering
Yes.
in that, and you're going through resources and assessments and improving ways because you think that could be done better, or there's a new system of doing something, would that also contribute to that as well, because you're applying?
It would depend how you do it, but usually no, because usually in your validation, it's your validation of assessment that you're actually doing. And usually the industry person is there having input to your assessment systems, which if those assessment systems aren't based on the most current ways of industry practice, then you may not necessarily be increasing your vocational currency.
But when you go through it and you identify that the assessment itself also needs to be updated because there have been changes to industry, changes to practice or something, so you either change a question or add more options or something in your
It depends how you present that information.
Okay.
Because as I said, if you're getting, you can actually do industry validation without people commenting on the specific content of the tools that you're using. And we see that quite a lot. So you couldn't necessarily guarantee that as part of that process, you've actually updated your industry skills. However, it's the same, be efficient as possible. If during that process you have, you might use that as an opportunity to say, is it possible for us to do some further work with you to make sure that we're totally current and that we understand what we're now moving our assessment systems to.
Thank you.
Is that industry involvement and validation, can that also be industry engagement?
It depends on what you're actually doing and how you've articulated what you're doing. Usually the question is, the answer is no, because of the way that most people do their industry validation. Usually they're talking about the tools that they're using and the actual assessments themselves, as opposed to the current industry practices. I totally agree that you might then move to making sure your assessments meet current industry practices, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee me that you as an individual are actually clear on what those practices are and you actually have some experience with the change that you're now assessing. If you can do the process, and you can do both of those things, but what comes across the desk every day would indicate to us that that isn't how industry validation is actually being done. Usually it's a subset of the industry validation. Oh, we're not doing things that way, we need to do some work in that area, some further work, as opposed to it being, you can tell me as an industry person, no, you need to change how you're assessing that because this is how we do it now. Doesn't mean that you as an individual trainer or an assessor have the relevant experience in that particular area. So just be very careful if you're trying to join those two together, that it actually articulates how you as a trainer and assessor have those skills. Not that you know how to assess against it, that you actually have them.
But doesn't that also bring industry engagement in the training and assessment program?
Sorry?
For the standard of industry engagement.
Yeah.
Doesn't industry involvement and validation contribute towards industry engagement?
It can contribute towards it, but it wouldn't meet all of the requirements for industry engagement. You would have to do more than have them look at your assessment systems with you to actually constitute industry engagement. Of a range, but it wouldn't meet all of the requirements just through doing your assessment validation. New information and workplace activities and environments, how you do or will adapt your delivery and assessment activities. This is, I just want to finish off on this because we've only got a couple of minutes to go. What's the auditor looking for? A process in place to establish equivalence if your trainer and assessor doesn't hold the particular qualification. You've got to demonstrate the clear and verified relationship between trainer and assessor's formal or informal training. Don't just put there that you've got a Bachelor of Engineering. That tells me nothing about how that qualification is relevant to how you're delivering a Cert 3. Current relevant industry skills, as I said, pull on your stuff from validation, pull on your stuff from your industry engagement, make it efficient as possible, and cluster when it might be 3 units that contribute to a particular work task so that you're not reinventing the wheel every time and going, what words can I use to make it sound different this time? Currently, vet knowledge and skills and ongoing PD, including competency-based training and assessment practices. I mentioned before, simply delivering training and assessment doesn't constitute professional development, especially if you're delivering it the same way you delivered it in 1985. It doesn't actually, it means that you're probably a good trainer and assessor. It probably means that you're delivering based on the professional development that you've done, so you need to demonstrate that. Some tips. What does the qualification say? Take it back to basics. If you've been presented with the matrix that takes 4 A4 pages I've got to end now, 4 A4 pages to articulate your matrix, put it aside for a second. It may be what your college or your RTO requires you to do. Put it aside and ask yourself the questions. How do I know that I can do what I do every day? Answer that question, you're 50% of the way there. How do you know you're keeping up to date with the changes and recent developments in industry? Are you doing what you say you'll do? don't let your own policies trip you up. We've had to pull people non-compliant. They've done a great job of articulating how they're current, but the RTO's policy says that they'll do it in a different way, so we have to call you non-compliant. That's pretty much all I've got for this session. You can visit the TAC website. If there's any providers in here that are registered with ASQA, it's pretty much like for like. We try very hard to be consistent with our approaches, but I do encourage you to check with your individual regulator. Thanks very much, everyone.
Authorised by the Government of Western Australia, Perth.